Hi, everybody. Great to be here. I wear several different hats. And so what was mentioned, I run a 20-year-old company. It is not geared towards residential at all. I help commercial, industrial, infrastructure like cell towers and pipelines and local governments. And I have projects on every continent, including Antarctica. So, but there is my contact information, my email on the lower right. So if there's something you want from particularly, in this case, an application side, I am happy to get you information or contacts. I also, as mentioned, teach at George Washington University. I'm teaching over the web for the first time this summer now to my grad class, first course in the country on renewable energy and critical infrastructure. And this one use the same Solar Sklar email if you need it. But I have about 400 studies on energy efficiency, renewable energy, energy storage, climate, and every other kind of thing. I'm happy to share them. So, matter of fact, you may wish you didn't ask for studies. So I always like this first 15-minute segment is sort of to give you an overview and trend of what's going on before we get to the detailed issue. And I love to use this chart. I always use other people's colorful charts, easy. And actually, this was a chart from a study done by Friends of the Earth on could we power the entire world on renewable energy. And by the way, I just did a webinar last week on that very issue. But this is a great chart because it shows we have a huge amount of renewable resources on this planet. 2,850 times more than we need a year in solar, 200 times more than wind, 20 times more from biomass. This is basically rotting biomatter, sewage, manures, food processing waste, crops we let die in the field. Geothermal heat from the earth, 9,000 degrees under the planet. And remember, we produce most of our electricity today by creating heat to create steam. Well, the planet does that for us. 2 times with tidal and wave energy and 1 time with hydropower. And really what that means is we don't really need to take a lot, and it's not economic, obviously, to harvest all of this, but you don't need to be able to take a lot to provide a huge amount of power. And we do. And it's all over the earth and pretty exciting to see all over the planet. So let me see how I move this forward, which is not moving forward. Now, why is that not happening? Okay. Scott's having a technical, oh, there it is. All right, well, the next slide, it's a McKinsey slide. And McKinsey is a global trend company, pretty well known. I happen to love this slide. It's about 12 disruptive technologies. And look, on the top left is renewable energy, what we're going to talk about today. Obviously, we're in a fracking oil and gas side of that too, which is not the topic of this talk. But the third one on the left is advanced materials. The reasons we have solar electric roofing shingles, wind turbines that can sit in the water over 50 years with salt and acid and animals that pit, and it's 700 times more dense than air, or storage, as you see the batteries 2 below, is we're in an advanced material science renaissance. We have things that weren't around 10 years ago. And it's extremely exciting, allowing us to fabricate and make things that will last, and frankly, that are also 100% recyclable, which wasn't possible 10 years ago. 3D printing, many of the things that we're making in renewables and energy storage efficiency, we use that. We are in also an energy storage renaissance. We have gigawatts of batteries coming in. We have pumped hydro. We have flywheels. We have compressed air and liquids, and also weights. We have even hydrogen. We have a huge amount of new energy storage technologies coming on the grid, and we're going to talk about that. And then I'm going to flip to the right of this chart and say it's really just the Internet of Things. And, you know, it's funny because in my business, I'm powering a lot what's on the Internet. I'm powering data centers. I'm powering cell towers. We power satellites with solar. And I also use the Internet to be able to keep track of all these functions all over the planet immediately. So, okay. So I want you to sort of hark back a little bit to the 1970s for those that you were alive back then. And there were these crazy people saying, hey, first of all, we didn't need one telephone company, AT&T, and the federal courts sort of solved that problem. But beyond that, we're not going to be on copper wire. And in fact, where we are from the 70s, and by the way, there are a lot of skeptics, is that we have a communication system that is on fiber optics, on satellites above the earth, and cell towers. And they seamlessly interface with each other. And we have what's called a self-healing grid. That means when a cell tower goes down, which happens every week, we don't lose service. The other cell towers triangulate around the down cell tower and take over the function. And then a decade later, we started having the internet. And guess what? Data centers have the same self-healing grid. When a data center goes down, which happens every month on this planet, the internet doesn't go down. It senses the data centers around the failing one instantaneously, and they move to surround it so that you can still get your data and send your data. So the electric grid is going to be the next one, the third wave, I call it. And that means from the left-hand side, we're going from when I had hair on my head and my beard, or even before my beard, we had central station power plants. And that's it. By the way, 100% built by the utility company to move power around. And it went on big transmission lines to substations, and then down in voltage to distribution lines to substations, and then down in voltage again to local distribution lines to get to your building or where you work. And it was an interesting system, but there was several problems with it. Is one, if there's an interruption, a line goes out, a transformer goes out, a huge part of your grid goes down. The other issue was it was actually pretty expensive. So what we started doing in the 70s and 80s is allowing private sector to build power plants. So now more than 50% of power plants are not built by utilities, are built by companies where the utilities sign long-term contracts. And then that started moving to renewables. But once you started getting renewables, you could make them in smaller and smaller versions. And so what we see is that says tomorrow, but is really today, we have central station power plants. We have huge wind farms and solar farms and geothermal farms along transmission lines. We have solar on substations. We have smaller solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, and water technologies along distribution lines. And then we have it at the point of use on or around the building, which is what we're going to talk about today. And in between all that stuff, we have smart sensors, controls, and all kinds of energy storage, not just batteries, but a lot of battery storage. So that when a line goes down, we will have the capability to route around that problem so no one loses power. In Puerto Rico, we have groups of technologies we call microgrids, where we can have parts of cities or agricultural sector passively separate from the grid when they sense a flicker that it's going to go down and power the critical functions so that food can be produced or people can get health care and communication. So that is what we're moving to, and we're moving in very, very quickly. So I want to talk about climate change. Again, it's 15 minutes. I can't do that much with it, but I picked some representative articles. This is the Washington Post in 2019, and October is another month that ranks the warmest on record. We have had several articles about it being 60 degrees in the North Pole and in Antarctica throughout last year and a couple of times this year. It's never been springtime in modern human history, or I think in any human history, as often as it is now at our poles. And that's showing something that is quite dramatic. But before we get into climate change, I really, again, and this is from the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, people confuse the difference between weather and climate. When I hang out with my friends at Starbucks at Lee Highway, and it's a different kind of day, and they say, you know, in the winter, it's, you know, sorry, in the spring here, it's super cold. It's not really climate change. Weather and climate actually are very different. Weather is a short-term condition of the atmosphere, and it can have many little aberrations. Climate is the average daily weather for an extended period of time in a location or region, so that you could have little aberrations on, you know, from day to day. But when you take a look at the whole year or 2 year range, you'll see that there's a generic trend. And if that generic trend all is getting warmer, which is what's happening, then you have a problem. Additionally, with climate change, we're finding that there are actually certain parts of the world that actually will get cooler, not warmer. And those are convection issues with water and land that I'm not going to talk about in this one. But this is my 2005 most important slide for you. This is the first time the International Academies of Science signed on together. And these are from the industrialized world: Brazil, China, Germany, India, Japan, United Kingdom, Canada, France, Italy, Russia, and the United States. And basically, they issued a joint statement in 2005 saying climate change is real. There'll always be uncertainty understanding a system as complex as the world's climate. However, there's strong evidence that a significant global warming is occurring, and the evidence comes from direct measurements of rising surface air temperatures and subsurface ocean temperatures, and from phenomena such as increases in average global sea levels, retreating glaciers, and changes in many physical and biological systems. Most of the warming in recent decades can be attributed to human activities. And then in 2019, they signed on an affirming statement saying clear support for scientific evidence of climate change. And they wrote, scientists have known for some time from multiple lines of evidence that humans are changing the Earth's climate primarily through greenhouse gas emissions. The evidence of the impacts of climate change is also clear and growing. The atmosphere and the Earth's oceans are warming. The magnitude and frequency of certain extreme events are increasing, and sea level is rising along all our coasts. The solid foundation of scientific evidence on climate change exists. It should be recognized, it should be built upon, and most importantly, acted upon for the benefit of society. So when I read these nonsense of usually non-climate scientists arguing with this solid evidence supported by the world's National Academy of Science, I laugh. And most of the time, I look at these things, either they're arguing very small points, which is fine, but not really critical, or they have no background and they think they do. So this is out of the International Energy Agency at the end of last year, where they're pretty much, the International Energy Agency are the industrialized nations based in Paris, and they have analysis and do joint reports. And basically, they say, you know, we're going, you know, limiting temperatures to below 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial times is a real challenge. And it looks like we're going to peak around 2040. And that's when really unexpected things are going to happen. And so the more we as a society can deal with this, and frankly, that I want to remind you why I believe this is so important, is that really has to be done at the local government level and the individual residents and business and nonprofit level, because we're the ones using the energy and we have the most control over it. So here's a chart from the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, and this is looking back 2017 on billion-dollar weather and climate disasters. And by the way, if you go on the website, they have several of these. I love them, not because it's good news, but it's easy to read. But this is the point. We really didn't have as many of these things going on all at once. You know, we don't have big western wildfires on one side, and then severe freezing storms. In fact, one of the things I was stunned at was polar vortexes. I actually have never heard of polar vortexes till recently, and I'm with a climate scientist who tells me, well, yeah, the polar vortexes stayed in Canada. They never came down anywhere near the U.S. border until the last 7 or 8 years. And in fact, polar vortexes now go and hit the Mason-Dixon line. So we know there is some climate aberrations going on because of that. So here's a chart of potential examples, potential economic effects of climate change by 2100, which are 80 years from now. Most of us here will not be alive to see this, but this is what we're going to leave our children. And in my classes at GW, if you look at the far left here, changes in water supply and demand, I want you to remember we only have 3% clean water. We are polluting our water like crazy. Unfortunately, we're easing our regulations on clean water. And the extraction, conversion, and use of energy today uses more water than agriculture. And we are going to have water problems that we have never, ever seen before. We're going to have coastal damage we have never, ever seen before. And in the southern part of the United States, we're going to have hot weather that in some cases people actually cannot live in. And that is some of the issues. And of course, our crop yields are going to go down where they have been historically in our country and move north, assuming we have the water. There's no guarantee of that, by the way. So what's sort of the bigger picture energy things as we have this climate albatross above us? And one of the great organizations, it's actually out of Washington, D.C., it's a think tank on energy efficiency, and they put out a great study that shows that we can halve U.S. energy usage by 2050. And again, our use of energy, the way we transport ourselves, the way we heat and cool and electrify our buildings, whether they're businesses or homes, are the two biggest outputs of greenhouse gases. And they said we can do it by energy efficiency. And energy efficiency, if you sat in my class, the first thing you will hear from me is it's always less expensive to save energy than generate it from any source. And then that's true. And we're going to talk, we have a whole thing on that in the next 15 minutes. But I would like to say this is a great study if you want to dig deep on, as a society, what we could do. Energy efficiency is also the fastest thing you can do in terms of greenhouse gases. The good news, this is out of the Pew Charitable Trust, May 19th, 2020, is that the 14 states and District of Columbia that have created very aggressive clean energy initiatives are holding fast even through COVID. And we have another 14 to 15 states that are not quite as aggressive, but very aggressive. So we have more than half of the states in this country rowing this boat pretty strongly. One of the drivers in the United States are renewable energy portfolio standards. These are actual requirements for new electricity brought onto the grid and they set deadlines, and they have different definitions, but you can see that this is, and they have different date certains. Virginia has just passed one, and Georgia and Florida also. So we have a few more states on board, but this is out of Berkeley, end of 2018. Lawrence Berkeley Lab. But the point being is these are the states that have been really driving the energy efficiency and renewable energy agenda because they really set legislative guidelines with penalties. And so they've created a market for lowering carbon. They're called renewable energy credits or efficiency credits or SRECs, solar renewable energy credits. And folks can buy them and trade them, but it gives a monetary benefit if you are bringing on renewable energy efficiency and now in some cases energy storage. So to bring it a little more locally and regionally, now this is out of the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, and this is a couple of years old, so it's not exactly current, but actually it gives you the trend. And as you can see, without question, at least in the short term, Maryland, and particularly Montgomery County here, has been a leader in the region. And DC, if we had a couple of years newer statistics, would be pulling right up to Montgomery County. They become quite a leader. And again, this year, Virginia has passed some breakthrough legislation, which should start bringing these little lines from the city of Alexandria up to Manassas City that we see here way up. And actually, they are probably a third of the way to where Prince George's is. So, but that gives you sort of a little sense of what is a couple of years ago. Okay, oops. Oh, all right. So this is December 2018, and Washington, D.C. Passed the Clean Energy DC Act unanimously and will be one of the first cities to transition to 100% renewable energy. And that's really pretty exciting. And they have one of the most aggressive and high rates for solar renewable energy credits in the country. And we see electric vehicles coming into play and very effective energy efficiency programs. So, and DC's goal is about 2032. So we'll see how that goes. In 2019, following year, Maryland General Assembly approves a 50% renewable energy target for 2030. And so this was pretty dramatic. And again, it will create some very strong solar and wind and water and some biomass. So April 13th, 2020, Virginia becomes the first state in the South to target 100% clean power. And it's pretty exciting. He issued first an executive order, and then the Virginia General Assembly passed the Clean Economy Act. And so that's very, very exciting. And that's going to change and sort of bring Virginia, well, definitely bring Virginia to where Maryland and DC are going. And, you know, they did it 1 year after each other. So there's going to be a big regional growth in this area, and that's good news. So since we've been doing an Arlington energy plan that I've been very active in, I have some charts and graphs. And this is our emissions profile locally. And frankly, it's not too much different regionally, or at least, you know, DC is a little different because all these government buildings. But you know, if you look in Arlington, and this would probably be true in Montgomery County as well, you know, transportation, inside transportation's a quarter, commuter transportation is another half of that, commercial buildings, slightly more than residential buildings, but pretty much, and then government's about 4%, and that includes the school system. So that sort of gives you a sense. So if we're talking about people here, you know, people meaning we live or we rent or own buildings, we work in buildings, and we have businesses, and we have transportation we use and choices we make, we can pretty much deal with 82% of our energy in terms of how we as human beings want it to happen. What are those emissions? And by the way, these are not, I just want to point out, this is greenhouse gas emissions. But I also want to remind you, we have Clean Air Act emissions. These are regulated emissions. These are particulates that ruin the linings of your lungs and give you accelerated heart disease. These are also nitrous oxides that burn your lungs and create smog. These are sulfur that can burn and kill trees and also burn out your lungs. So, and mercury, which are heavy metals like lead and gasoline, which retards the development of baby brains and actually hurts elderly brains. And so these emissions profiles are all related. It's not just one thing you're looking at. So this is the clean energy plan, how we adopted it in Arlington. And basically what our goal was to try to get rid of the peak, the higher cost power, the more expensive power. And so the way to do that, we decided to get rid of that high cost power in Arlington is energy efficiency, because I just told you it's the lowest cost way to do it, and it's the fastest way to do it. And so that's the first step in what we're doing here in Arlington. Combined heat and power, so we're using the heat when we generate electricity. Absorption and reflection. That way we are reflecting heat out of buildings and bringing them into buildings or processes, which save lots of energy. And then solar photovoltaics and solar water heating, actually, both of them, to finish it off. All of these, by the way, are cost effective. And we're hoping in Arlington, and by the way, Montgomery County is following something very similar. I don't have that chart. But the whole point is to get rid of these higher costs that either we have to bring on peaker plants, which are old coal or gas plants, or we have to bring in the power from some other state. And in many cases, it had been like West Virginia, which is all coal. So we want to drop that whole use. We don't want to bring in this extra power. We also want to get into building labeling. This was a voluntary one we had for commercial buildings. Notice the voluntary carbon footprint on it too. But we're going to get into this when we get into the next presentation. But I just want to show you, we want to make it evident where you're building in. When you're moving into a building. Globally, it's a $1.6 trillion set of clean energy industries, very exciting and still growing, in this case 4 times the global GDP. In 2019, this is an article from, again, the International Energy Agency, 72% of new global electric power, meaning electricity coming on the electric grid, was renewable, not fossil. Was renewable. And this is a report recent, January 2019, so a little over a year ago, looking at Lazard, one of the great analytical firms, basically saying renewable energy continues to be cheaper than natural gas and coal, which is why we're seeing this move. In this case, is looking in the United States. The world has 583.5 gigawatts of operational photovoltaics. That's 583.5 daytime nuclear power plants. That's huge. This is a great study which shows that each state, looking at all the renewable resources they have that can be sustainably accessed by technology we have today. And most of the states, by the way, have way more than they can use from the resources they have sustainably. And this did not include tidal and wave and wind, which is now becoming offshore wind, coming economical, which would bring New York and Georgia and Florida and New Jersey and most of New England above 100% too. So we have huge potential in growing and becoming either mostly independent or totally independent, and then sharing with the transmission lines to those that need it. This is wind energy generation around the United States. And this is what's exciting about this one. Now, this is 2018. So there's a little more of it out there, but look at some of these states. Iowa, 1/3 of its electricity. Kansas, 1/3. Oklahoma, almost 1/3. North Dakota, South Dakota, 1/4 of its energy is that. Texas actually produced, even though it's only about 16%, produces more wind energy than any state, I think, followed by California. So the issue is we're seeing that, and you're going to see more and more of that coming on the East Coast, but most of that will be offshore. I'm going to skip that data. I give 36 studies to my classes. I'm not going to be able to talk about them today, but I have listed them here for you to take a look at. And this is a chart the National Renewable Energy Laboratory did to show, again, how we could reduce greenhouse gases in our country by 80 or 60% by 2030, cost effectively, with the top one, of course, looking at energy efficiency, again, fastest and lowest cost, and then wind and biofuels and biomass and photovoltaics and concentrated solar power for the deserts and geothermal. I had my student grad interns read all these 36 studies and pick what would be, if you want to go 100%, what would be the most conservative estimates from them. And actually this adds up to more than 100% because it's just calculating the conservative estimates to give you where that will come from. We're going to talk about some of these in the next presentations. And then just some places around the country. This is Orlando, Florida, 100% renewable energy by 2050. Glenwood Springs, Colorado, 100% renewable energy. Germany has exceeded a few days, 50% renewable energy in the fourth largest economy in the world. And lastly, to end up so I can take your questions, I just want to remind you, looking from space on this very amazing day after we sent our astronauts up into the International Space Station, you can look all over on your telescope. You won't see many balls like this. This is our nest. This is our planet. And it's a very fragile little ball. And we can turn this barren like the other ones, or we can figure out how to preserve its majesty. And I hope that those of you on this, listening to this webinar, are thinking about that as we're doing that. And with that, I would happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, Scott. Okay, so we have a question, and maybe it's something that you're covering in the next segment, but the question is, what measures do you recommend within your home? So, I think that's the only question we have.
Well, then let's go right into the other ones. How about that?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Okay.
I talk too much. That's my problem. So let's get into energy efficiency. Screen sharing has stopped. That's bad. How do I get back? Okay, gotta get here. Share the screen. Share screen. Okay. Boom. Okay, go to.
That's good.
Okay, let me get to the full screen. So, don't need me. So this is the share of energy by source. And look at energy efficiency here. If we didn't do it, we'd need 18% more energy. And by the way, the 18% is more than nuclear power. Coal, by the way, has just dropped down below 20, and energy efficiency has gone up, so it's actually equal with coal. So it's pretty exciting. I also want to remind you that 2/3 of CO2 come from heat and electricity from the electric generation sector, thermal sector, which is heating buildings and industrial processes, cars, and then other transportation like trucks and airplanes. So those are the big things that we have maybe some control over. And so, and I already showed you this, but we could half our uses by energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is about 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Most of you, and ranges up to a little over 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Most of you are paying between 9 and 13 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's absolutely cost effective. And these are how some of the energy efficiency programs are being modeled in the United States. This is residential energy efficiency and looking at what you can do. Notice on the top right, behavior is one, like turning out your lights, not running air conditioning when you don't need it, closing your windows. I see a lot of homes have their air conditioning running and a window open. Why would you do that? So there's some of that. Obviously, educational programs doing it. Smart thermostats, so you don't have to think about it. You can program it. They have about 15 of them, all fabulous. And I want you to think about those things. So these are the states that are the best and worst in energy efficiency. Notice that Virginia and Maryland are right in the middle. They're not bullish as they could be, like some of those green states, but they're not with West Virginia and Alabama, Mississippi, thank goodness. These are the labels. I remember I showed you one in Arlington that ASHRAE, which is the Commercial Technical Association, has for commercial industrial buildings. U.S. Department of Energy has a residential one. Germany has commercial ones, United Kingdom has residential. And again, these are attempts to allow customers to know about their building, and in some cases energy, and in the West also on water. And so that's it. So I want to talk about insulation. And insulation is measured by R value, resistance value. The higher the resistance, the more it keeps in heat and cold. And so I have 2 buildings that do not use any electricity from the electric grid for the inside of those buildings. And the first thing I did in my home is R38 insulation in the walls, R50 in the ceiling, the top highest ceiling. My building, my little 2-story office building behind my home, R50. Happy to give socially distanced tours, but the insulation is the best payback. Why lose your heat? And I can walk around the wintertime in Arlington or anywhere, but Arlington's where my home is. And during the wintertime, the houses where their snow is dripping off the edges is where the least insulation is. Their heat's coming out of their roof, melting their snow. And the ones that don't, no, they have the best insulation. So that's the first thing you got. And there's all kinds. This is polyisosanurate, the rigid insulation. There's the batting insulation. There's the foam insulation. There's, all kinds of new materials, wools and stuff like that, all wonderful stuff. And so you have maximum choice. You have about 30 choices now. Smart windows. Windows are pretty important, but windows let heat and cold come out of them. And in fact, single pane windows are fundamentally ridiculous. I have thermal guns where I walk around a house in the wintertime or the summertime, and I can measure the heat or cold coming out. And in most cases, you have a single pane window, you're losing the same amount of heat as if you had no window. So why would you do that? So when you need window replacing, for those of you that own your buildings, now, of course, you've got, if you rent, it's hard to do this, you can, when you get new windows, get double pane windows. Get low-E coatings on them to reflect the heat out during the summer so it doesn't naturally heat your house. By the way, if you rent, you can go to Lowe's or, Home Depot and get thin film films and put on your windows, which do the same thing as it embedded in the glass, and knock that heat out during the summertime. It's going to lower your air conditioning. So that with a smart thermostat might be a way to immediately save energy. Why wouldn't we want to do that? So again, I have double pane, argon-filled, low-E coating windows on my home. And I have basically triple nanotechnology pane, but triple pane windows in my back office building. Most of you know about LED lights. There are all sorts now. They're actually, when they started, they were $25 to $30. I can go to Home Depot and buy them for $4 to $6. I can get them in different colors. I get ones now that go in fluorescent housing, look like fluorescent tubes. I have them in my tool shop in my basement. It's crazy. You're not going to use an LED light. They use 82% less electricity than incandescent lights, and they last for over 20 years. Why anyone would not want that, I don't know. And they have ones you can color variations. So if you have it on your bathroom mirrors, and those of you that wear makeup, I don't, does it clashes with the beard, and you need certain kinds of light, you can get bulbs that fit that kind of light. Natural daylighting, this is just one kind. There are actually many kinds. I have the tube on that's my office building behind my home, and you see a little bubble to the right. Oops, back up. Where am I? Oops, now I've totally lost my thing here. Hold on a second. Where am I? There I am. That is the little tube there goes to my bathroom in my building. Solar daylit tubes do concentrators and reflectors without the heat. They bring in full spectrum light. Best Buy and Walmart build all their stores with solar daylighting, and purchasing goes up 11% the day they do it. So There's peer-reviewed studies that show that students get sick less in solar daylit schools, workers are more productive, in hospitals, people heal faster. And of course, you don't need electric lighting, particularly in the daytime. It really changes. On this building, aside from the insulation and windows, we'll get into that. You'll see it again when we get back to renewable energy. So net zero homes are homes that save energy, an immense amount of energy. And by the way, when I moved to my house, it was a one-story Sears bungalow, used 5.4 kilowatts maximally in an hour. I doubled the space, put insulation, LED light bulbs, smart windows, very efficient appliances. We'll talk about my heating and cooling in a moment. And now the maximally I use is 3.2 kilowatts. So I doubled the space and cut my energy by a third. How wonderful that is. So why net zero? And these are my buildings. You see my SpongeBob and for holiday season in front of my house in the middle, and right behind it, my office building. And you can see the solar and panels. But the first thing I did in both buildings is reduce the electricity to barely nothing so that I have enough space then to determine what I'm doing. The first thing I did on my home is solar water heating, where you put a solar panel and it basically heats the water in your water tank. And I have a little solar electric pump that pumps, in this case, the glycol through the panel. And, you know, it meets 100% of my water heating load. And by the way, my daughter, when she was a teenager, used more hot water than an industrial manufacturing plant. By the way, paid for itself the moment I did it. These are the benefits of solar water heating. This was done by the solar industry in California. Solar water heaters are rated by the Solar Rating and Certification Corporation. So they rate the collectors and the systems. And so you can take a look at different manufacturing. Your biggest electric load is your HVAC, your heating, ventilation, and cooling system. And this is an article from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, Department of Energy, talking about higher ratings for these requirements. This is the geothermal heat pump I put in my house. It works. I did refrigerant tubes, in this case, rather than water, into the ground, 100 feet in slanted holes, and refrigerant tubes into the house. And this has cut my air conditioning load, which is the biggest load in my building, by 75%. And so there's been great advances in ductless heat pumps, which are refrigerant-based heat pumps, traditional, and then, of course, these geothermal heat pumps. And again, you can either do them laterally under the ground 15 feet, or you can do holes in the ground. So I only needed 4, so you can pick depending on how big your building is. Appliances matter. I have the Whirlpool Cabrio washer, and I had the Maytag Neptune washer before that. They both use 60% less electricity than a regular washing machine. And by the way, 40% of the water in a regular washing machine's lowest setting. And in Arlington, water costs more than electricity. So, you know, these things pay for themselves. And then I put a whole big thing about SEER ratings for appliances, window air conditioners, regular air conditioners, refrigerators, washing machines, dishwashers, so you understand what SEER is about and what that is. And again, there are no dumb questions, and I will take all of them. Take it away.
Yeah, Scott, we have one you can probably knock out pretty quickly, and that is, what's the life of a solar panel?
A solar water heating panel, mine that went on in my water heating panel went on in 1985, and it had, there was one little technology replacement, but it's still up there. My solar electric panels also went up, my first ones in 1985. And they produce about 14% less electricity now, but they're doing fine. There's no reason either panel should go down.
Okay, great. And also the question for, if you live in a historic district, or I suppose there's houses that are labeled historic, what kind of regulation is there on insulation and smart windows, and I suppose, you know, solar panels as well?
Well, the issue really is, and parts of Alexandria, of course, have that. Also, some homeowner associations put up barriers, though in most of the states now we've sort of been able to ease those up. It's really the visuality from the street. So I put solar water heating and photovoltaics. As long as you can't see them from the street, you're fine. Some windows, depending on how old your building is, because a lot of them, if they have the original rolled windows. So what I'll do is I'll do it from the inside. I'll put a window. I'll leave the old window there. I will put a insulated glass behind the window, so you actually can't tell it's there from the street, but it becomes my insulator. So us old dogs that have done these projects before, there are ways around it, but it is more costly and time consuming doing historic buildings than not.
Okay, and also we have a question about tree canopy and how does that fit into the energy conservation and reducing CO2 emissions, especially in Arlington, where we do have some older neighborhoods.
Well, I have tree canopy too. First thing is, I'm a big believer in tree canopy. It keeps your house cooler. It's absorbing carbon, and there are ways to deal with it. I'm going to plop into my next presentation because I sort of deal with that. So can I do that, or do we have?
Yeah, that's fine. And just when you get to that point, there's a question related to that. In that, if you have some shade on your house, how does that impact the economics of getting solar panel? But you can.
That's what I'm going to get into the next one. So let me, since I'm behind time here, correct? I better.
I think we're doing fine. There's a couple clean. If you clean your air duct, does that make any savings? Energy savings?
Yes. Ducts, air ducts. Yes. By the way, I am not a big believer in ducted systems anymore. But if you have them, you got to clean them. And it's not just for energy efficiency, it's your health. I'm told, by the way, from several studies that I've read, about 4 weeks after you clean your ducts, the same horrible stuff grows back in it, but it also deters that. So I strongly suggest even exceeding what the recommended requirements are for filters and duct cleaning if you can do it.
And also a couple related questions. Are there local firms that can help you with this kind of work? And also, what's your view in terms of hiring a company to conduct an energy audit on your house? So I think those are probably kind of related.
Those are great. Yes, there are some great area energy audit companies around, and they actually have, a whole checklist of stuff. They start in your basement, go to your attic, and, check for cracks and look at insulation and insulation, or under your moldings around your windows and doors, which are pretty important, all that kind of stuff. It also saves you from getting bugs and squirrels and other things. So it's probably a good idea if you've never had it, particularly if you have an older building. I think it's essential. Reasonably, anything past 1980, you might be able to do it yourself off the web. But looking at doing an energy audit makes the most sense. For solar, water heating, and electricity, there's a Maryland, Virginia, DC Regional Solar Energy Industries Association. Now, for 15 years, I ran the national trade group. This is the regional trade group, the chapter, and it has all the solar installers and service companies in the region. And they have to have there's a code of conduct. So if they're getting complaints from the Better Business Bureau and the state, the state agencies, then they're not part of the chapter. So you want to check with that.
Okay, just one final one, which I think you'll probably cover when you get to solar panels. So the question is a little specific, but if you already have solar panels and you need to replace your roof, should you replace solar panels? I guess that kind of gets at, are there increased efficiencies with?
Well, that same thing happened to me. I put a new roof on my home. It just was old. And I took the panels off and put the new roof on and just put them right back up. I created some new kinds of connectors, but solar panels, if you've invested them, and they're still working. It's crazy to replace them because they're working, and they're pumping out electricity or hot water. So my view is don't replace them unless there's a functional problem. And you can test the output of these things, and once in a while you may hit a solar electric panel that isn't putting out. There's some internal error, or sometimes the laminates start separating and you're getting some water in there which starts shorting it out. But most of them, not at all. Not at all. And you can have the solar installer or service company that's taking your panels off can test your panels in daylight and see if they're within the reasonable range. But all mine were. I didn't have to change one panel out.
Okay, great. I think why don't we go ahead and move on to the third segment.
Okay. So again, I just put some data on what's going on solar hitting in a single day. Could power the world for 27 years. I already did this. Renewables are neck and neck with natural gas, which is our newest form of fossil fuel. We as a nation have tax incentives for renewable energy and energy efficiency. For solar, we have an investment tax credit, and you can see that it's ramping down. If you look at the bottom of this chart, 30% by the end of 2019. Of course, we're done with that. Now we're at 26%. Next year, it's 22%. And if Congress doesn't do anything, which I expect they will, but if they don't, it will be 10%. But the point being is we have incentives, and this is the installed cost. By the way, if you include batteries with the solar system or a small wind turbine like I did, you can take the investment tax credit for whatever you package together if it makes inherent sense in the system. So we have that. There's a special form for that. Your accountant or the IRS on their website can show you that. And again, you need to have the installed cost from the company you pick. They have a special form they have to issue you to include with your tax return. And by the way, you can carry these over for 5 years. So if, for instance, you're not paying a lot of taxes, COVID, your income's gone down, you can carry that over 5 years until you use it up. Again, this is my office. I have solar shingles, roofing shingles on that. You notice I have a small wind turbine off the left side of the building, and that goes into a battery bank that I will show you. In both cases, now I'm a little nutty because I've been in the field so long. I did not want to ship my electricity to the utility company. That's called net metering. And if you have under a 10 kilowatt system, I doubt any of you would ever have any more than that for a residence or a small business. You're allowed to net meter, which means whatever you don't use, you shove through your electric meter onto the wires, and you get credited for that. For me, I don't do that. I put it in a battery bank. The difference being that if there's a power outage, with your net metering, you go down too. But if you have storage, I don't go down. So when I have an outage, my neighbors start knocking on my door at night and come in and drink my single malt scotch and bourbon because they know I have lighting and air conditioning or heating. So this is the battery bank in that in my office building. And this is one of the first standardized battery banks. Notice it has a little window on it on the right, which is the microprocessor. And it dials out and does a diagnostic protocol at night to make sure it's operating correctly. And it allows me to go on the internet and see how much solar and wind I've gotten, what's the state of charge of the batteries, what's gone into my building, how much money I've saved, how much pollution I've saved. Those are my two buildings again. And notice my back building, of course, and my house has different kinds of solar panels because when I was doing this, I was running the Solar Energy Industry Association. So I don't know any people that had solar. I knew somebody on Fillmore Street that had solar water heating. I didn't know anybody with solar electricity, so I wanted to show it off. So I just have different kinds of solar panels, both off my porch, the peel and stick for a metal seam roof, and then the top ones on the right, top 4 and top 8, both on the right of the roof, or closest to the street, I guess for you, is went on in 85, and then there's a few in the center there on the top peak that went on in 92, and then in the late 90s, the rear went on. And they're all different companies and different systems. And then the middle of the roof, there's a big horizontal panel, and that's my solar water heater. So, and there's another look on the roof from the street of my house. Now, some of the solar panels are blocked. Notice I have a tree there, but well, I mapped the roof, and I'm going to get into how you map your roof to see not all trees. By the way, that roof faces south, and not all trees block your roof. So, and what's interesting, on my porch, which has the peel and stick panels, some panels, if they get shaded, the whole panel shuts down. So on my porch roof, I picked the panels that don't, if they get shaded, they don't shut down. They produce as much as how much light is hitting it. And again, just shows you. Now this we don't do anymore. You actually see the wires coming out of the panels there. Here we do it in the more modern, we do it off the edge of the building where you wouldn't see it. Oh, and there's the other side of my rear side of my roof. Notice on the peak, I have a solar vent fan. And so I use giant ones for industrial commercial buildings. So go back to your science class in middle school, junior high school, heat rise to the highest point in any building. If you're always venting it out, it's going to save about 6% off your air conditioning during the summer. So there's a little solar vent fan, and then you see all these different types of panels I have. Again, I wasn't trying to be as aesthetic. First of all, you couldn't see it really hard, not easy to see from the street, and I was trying to educate people. This is a town in Japan where all the buildings have solar water heating and solar electricity. They have batteries in their attic. They have geothermal heat pumps. They have R30 insulation, and they have double pane low E coating windows. And all these buildings produce 100% of their electricity, and the extra electricity runs the signal lights and the pipeline pumps and other things that these towns have. Japan has hundreds of these. 100 towns that do this. And this was before Fukushima, the nuclear meltdown. So these are the states that have net metering, which means the right to interconnect to the grid and be paid a reasonable rate for your excess electricity. And note that Texas and Idaho and actually Georgia have rules on this too. So very few states don't allow you to net meter. And so there we go. And that means you get paid. So you don't, if you don't want batteries, you're using the electric grid as the batteries. And then these are the states, again, that have portfolio standards. Now, again, Georgia and Florida have a modified one that are not on this chart. But at any rate, most of them, again, reward the utility for allowing this electricity onto the grid. So money, there are different ways to buy solar water heating and photovoltaics and wind and battery banks. You can buy it outright and get the tax credit. And that's a great idea if you can do it. If you can't, companies will either give you a purchase agreement or a leasing agreement. Tesla, for instance, gives you a leasing agreement, which means that you're not paying for the system, you don't own the system, you don't get the tax credit, you just pay a monthly fee, either based on the electricity price, that's what a power purchase agreement is, or a leasing price, it's generally about the same amount. And then, and that way, it's less than what you'd be paying from the utility company during the day. That's really what it is. So it's a way to get solar electricity, save money, and not put any money out. Again, you don't get the tax credit because these folks own your system, and the investors are getting the tax credit. In energy efficiency, solar water heating, and now sort of photovoltaics, if you're in a building like a condominium building or just a regular apartment building, the owner can come in and have a company come in and they'll put in LED lights, Some cases they'll put insulation or insulate the ducts, put in a solar water heating or a heat pump water heater, and in some cases solar, and they'll put up the money, and then they'll share the savings with you. And so that's another way to look at it and get your energy efficiency and renewables. So there's a lot of interesting, innovative ways you can finance these things where you're not pumping money out of your pocket if you don't have it. We also have in Arlington, commercial PACE, which is property assessed clean energy. In Maryland, you have residential PACE. And so there are other ways to, and this way you can, that's another way to finance it using your local government's tax assessment to do it. Basically, you're waiving it, you're financing it out of what you would pay for taxes. And then when the building is sold, like when you move or you die, then they'll be reimbursed. So it's a very innovative way we're starting to do energy efficiency and renewable energy. And then, of course, for schools, hospitals, and opportunity zones, we have other kinds of financing. So we have lots of different companies that are able to look at roofs. This is from a satellite. This is Eagle View. They took the 2 pictures from the satellite of my buildings I showed you earlier. This is it. I asked them on certain times a day to run the satellite so I could see with those trees on the south side whether it would shade my panels. And there are some giant trees in my neighbor's house, which would be at the bottom of the picture here, which is due south, and they don't get in the way of my solar on my panels at all. So that's how I know. I get some shading at the bottom part of the roof, so I didn't put so much solar at the bottom part. I put it near the peak, and there it is. And you can see the glare coming right off the panels. This is another company, and they're able to take a Google map and then overshade by season and time of day where the best sunlight is hitting the roof, which would be, and so it's sort of the green or the darker reds, and that's where I would put my the solar panels. I can do that anywhere on Earth. And so we have great tools to know where we can locate panels. If you're having batteries, you need charge controllers. And this means that the solar comes into these boxes. Now, because to the battery banks, and they make sure the batteries are optimally charged and don't overcharge. These are the batteries I have in my house. I have a little area before you get into my basement, and it's just covered from the rain. That's it. It's sort of, it still has airflow through. And these are 18 absorbed glass matrix batteries from California. And I love these batteries. So unlike lithium ion, I don't have to air condition them or anything. You see I have a big circuit breaker box at the end there where you can turn it off, but I store all my electricity in this battery bank. This is the best chart I have on batteries, and it says who it's helping. Is it helping the transmission authority of the green arch or the utility on the bottom? But you're the customer in this one. So it gives you increased PV self-consumption. It gives you backup power. And then if there's different charges on your utility bill, you can orchestrate it so you're providing power when it costs you more. And that's particularly for the commercial small business sector. You also get out of your and this is very true in DC, Northern Virginia, and the Maryland suburbs around DC. We have actually, and I'm going to get attacked for this, but I'm telling you right now, crappy power quality. That means we have sags, under voltages, over voltages, which are swells. We actually call them surges. And then transients, which are spurts of electrons that come out of the wall socket. And all of that wreaks havoc on digital equipment. And, you know, sadly, you know, when I had hair on my head and my beard was dark, everything was tubes. Now they're chips. And, you know, and my stove has a chip, my refrigerator is a chip, of course, my HVAC system has a chip. And these things burn out. And it's because of the bad old distribution systems, old transformers blowing out, higher heat, which causes transformers to have problems, and you get this bad power quality. Battery banks solve that whole problem, keeps it very smooth. So this is Tesla's battery bank they have on the market. Again, you lease that. Sonnen, the biggest battery company in Germany, has a battery on the market. This is LG from South Korea. They have a great battery bank out in the market. This is AB&B. This is mostly in Europe, though they're bringing this battery bank here. These are the Tesla roofing shingles. They're actually textured glass. They're very expensive, but they're a place of shingles. So if you can afford them, I love them, and they look beautiful. I talked about solar ratings. Oh, this I put in. There are different sensors and controls for your solar system. I gave you a window out of SolarSense, and to tell you, notice they can have the fridges turned on when the bathroom light is upstairs, how much solar you're getting. You can actually see, in this case, you have way more solar than what you're using because you'd see more circles on the left-hand side. So it means you're going to be dumping a lot in the grid that day. And then, of course, if you left your refrigerator door open and your HVAC on and whatever else, you left your door of your house open, all of a sudden you'd see the energy use giant balls next to your solar. But it's a great way to make your energy use and understand what's coming from your solar more transparent. The other thing, and when you're getting proposals from a company, you want the installers to have experience. First of all, you want at least 3 customers. You want a description of their homes. You want all their information, email and phone, so you can call them. They need to be around your area. They need not to have the last same name as the owners of the company. And you need to call. You actually need to make the phone call and see how their system's operating. If they're close enough, go visit them and see the system. We have some certification programs. The one that's most well known is the North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners, NABCEP, and you would want to specify that the actual installer that's putting on your system is either NABCEP accredited or comparable, because you want to make sure that that person has that experience. I am here to tell you one thing. I want you to think about this. This is true in energy efficiency, and it's true in solar, and it's true in batteries. 95% of the failures have nothing to do with technology. It is wrong installation, period. So you got to spend some time to make sure that that's true. Here's another way to, this is how your way to take a look at, these are out of a proposal, looking at where the solar would be put on a building, how it would, where it would produce, what time of day. Obviously between 10 and 4 is sort of the biggest time, and how much energy you would use and all that kind of stuff. More on tiles, and no more, and more, and they're ready for no dumb questions. Here we go.
Yeah, Scott, so we have, I think you've convinced a lot of people, because people are interested in, how you go about, I mean, you did cover how you go about finding a solar installer. I mean, I wonder if you have any recommendations, and also going back to window replacements and duct cleaning. We had someone that had a bad experience with that, with spraying dust all over the house. So I don't know if you want to get into specific company recommendations or just how to go about.
No, well, people need specific company recommendations. They should email me, because I don't want to do it up here. But clearly, again, for the solar side, you should use the Regional Solar Trade Association, Maryland, DC, Virginia, SCIA, Solar Energy Industry Association. I'm happy to get that for you if you can't find it by Googling it, and go through their thing if you want to check and see if they're right. The ones that interest you, send me an email. HVAC, I'm president of my civic association here in Arlington, and we trade on our listserv. There's also Nextdoor, that's in Northern Virginia and Maryland and DC. That's like a listserv. but you can ask around for people that's done great energy efficiency and um, uh, energy audits, energy efficiency, duct cleaning, all that stuff, and get recommendations as well. And so I would strongly recommend that. The best way is to get a local recommendation.
Okay, great. We've got some very specific questions. So one of
Sure.
them is, Solar United keeps sending me emails about the threat to net metering. What is that all about?
Well, this should not surprise any of you. Utility companies do not want to take your electricity. They make money producing it on themselves and charging that to you. Here, you're giving it basically for free, but you want to be paid for that rate. So they are trying to put up barriers to it. So what Solar United's trying to do is for you, for those who have solar and those who will have solar or are interested, to say, don't get rid of an incentive. If you don't want to buy a battery bank and you're producing electricity for the grid, that you should have no cost of entry and you should be getting a fair and reasonable rate. And that's the, I remember that slide I showed you of the old versus the new grid. The new grid, everybody's going to be producing electricity from something sometime a day. And we need to keep that as vital as we can. And I'm hoping that those of you that want to, be vigilant and support the new future will heed the calls from Sun and others.
Okay, just kind of skipping back to the venting issue or the technique. So how do you keep it? I assume there's a way to keep critters from getting in your through that vent. Do companies just take care of that, or do you have to pay attention to that?
Well, no, there are these are talking about the air vents with the HVAC system. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, the air vents, so the hot air will go out of your house through your roof.
Well, yeah, I mean they have screens over them or grates over them to do that. Once in a while, I must say, raccoons and squirrels are very ambitious, and I've seen some of that happen. But in general, again, you have a service contract. Make sure they glue that to somewhere on the wall or on the HVAC device so you know where to call them. And there are companies that do that all the time.
Okay, and then we have a couple questions on batteries. One is very general, which is that when electricity goes out, how much, how long can the batteries cover your electrical needs? Obviously, there's probably a lot of things that's dependent on, and also someone is wondering who they could talk to understand their Sonnen battery, SONNEN.
Yeah.
In terms of how to program it. So if you want to kind of take those.
Yeah. Well, first of all, what I suggest for homes or apartments, if you can do it, is to tie the battery to a sub-circuit breaker panel and put on the sub-circuit breaker panel the 6 to 8 things you want to run when there's a power outage. So for me, that was the electronic ignition on my gas stove, my refrigerator, my Wi-Fi, my sump pumps in the basement so I didn't have a flood in the basement, a small TV set, a couple of lights, so I had lights. And so that was the first thing I did when I started with solar and batteries. And so then they're taken off my grid forever, actually, 100%. And when there's a grid outage, that small portion of my electricity is totally covered by the batteries forever. So that's the best way to do it. I'm not a big believer in just putting a battery system in and say, if there's an outage, it will keep you going for the whole house in 3 hours. I think that's sort of silly. I think you want to use it as an energy efficiency measure to take electric loads off your bill, and those are the ones that are your priorities. So when there's an outage, you can comfortably ride through it.
Yeah. So the other was a specific question of a Sonnen battery, SONNEN, and where can they get information on programming it optimally? I don't know if you...
Theoretically, you should be able to get them right off the Sonnen website. They have a spec sheets, and and that should be part of it. If you need help with that, email me. There are a couple of old dog solar installers that have been installing around here for 30 years that I know, and they're based in Montgomery County, but they come to Arlington and Alexandria all the time, and most of them could, you're going to cost you, but most of them could help you do that. But there should be no problem with that. I'm able to get people with those battery systems all the time.
Okay, so I guess we have someone that said they're trying to get the installer to put on critter guards, but they can't tell if they're being put off or the company's too busy. But I mean, that should be a pretty simple item, I would think, right?
Yeah, I mean, normally you put the critter guards when you're installing your system, not after it's installed. So I think that's the problem. A lot of them are real busy. And so coming back to do something at the end is sort of hard. But I'm sure we'll be able to help. If you go to the solar, Maryland, DC, Virginia Solar Association, say you want to pay somebody to do that, you'll find a company that does that. You don't need to use the same company you did before. I mean, it's basic technology. It's pretty simple.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've covered everyone's questions. I mean, I guess I have a question from, when you're talking about climate change, and it sounds like there's a lot going on that people can do, and the technology is there. We always talk about here that the fossil fuel industry has a stranglehold on our politics. Is that story kind of old? Are we past that, or is that still a?
Oh no, the fossil industry and the electric utility industry have immense control over our political system. And by the way, just like the phone industry did not want to allow cellular, they said it would not be economic and wouldn't work. And there was a lot of folks trying to knock down the internet too. There's always forces that don't want to have change, and they're going to fight to keep the status quo because that's how they know how to make money, and that's how they make money. Yes, we are fighting that every single day, actually.
Well, and here's the question. I mean, why are we fracking if we're moving to renewables? And I'll just add on to that. You hear that natural gas is something that we can use as a transition to renewables. I mean, does that make sense, or should we just really be concentrating exclusively on renewables?
Well, I mean, I'm in the renewable field, so obviously I would say that I actually have no problem looking at natural gas as a transition fuel. But if you're doing that, that means you're not going to be fracking in areas where you have lack of fresh water. You're going to actually reclaim all the water and put in technologies that do it, not just pump it in open ponds where it kills birds and ruins the land. So there's, the reason a lot of these abuses are happening is we're just pumping money into it and not thinking about it. So does natural gas have a place? Yes. Is it being done in a smart way? No, because if it was, they wouldn't. Some of those within the industry would not be against the environmental controls and controls on water quality and tracking methane emissions and all the other things that we believe is needed. So anything done smartly is good. It gives us more time to evolve and build a better energy system. But right now, we're not doing a lot of things smartly.
Okay, well, I mean, we just have a few minutes left, and I don't see any further questions. So I think I'll throw it back to you, Scott, and for any things that you want to wisdom you want to leave us with. But I really want to thank you for all the great information. I think this has been very useful, and people will probably hopefully take it and make some changes. So
well, I could give you just one last sentence again.
Yeah, go ahead. You got a couple of minutes, and go ahead.
Well, it says 4:30. Anyway, I just want to say, one, energy efficiency investments first, without question. Secondly, take a look at, not necessarily the biggest renewable energy systems, but systems that fit the size of your house and your lifestyle. I don't do residential, but a lot of my neighbors come to me and I go, no, you don't want the biggest solar system. You actually want a really sort of small to mid-sized systems tied to that sub-circuit breaker panel and take care of your critical functions. And I've convinced a lot of my neighbors to start putting in small battery banks too. So, think about this as not doing the most giant thing, but doing smart surgical things that will save you money, make you more energy secure, because we're going to have a lot more outages with extreme weather because of climate change, and help our planet and help your children and your grandchildren. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, and just one thing. So they're asking if we have access to the slides. I know we have copies. Do you have any problem, Scott, if we put it up on the Encore website?
Not at all. Put up as a PDF. I see Dennis here putting up his hand. So is there a hand there, Dennis? Or was that a mistake? Okay, sorry. All right.
Yeah, I don't see anything, but yeah, we're at the bewitching hour. But thank you so much, Scott, for taking this time and sharing this great information with us.
Thank you very much. Great to be with Encore. Thanks again.